Hey friends! In this tutorial, I want to show you 3 ways that you can change color in Photoshop. In particular, I want to focus in on how we can use adjustment layers to change color. Here we'll look at how we can use hue saturation, how we can use color balance, solid color on a blending mode. We'll also talk about masking and selections. We'll look at how we can change the brightness and tonality of an area, how we can change the entire color of a large area, or how we can change a specific area like a door or a back panel on this VW bus. We're going to cover all of these topics and more. So if you are interested in learning how you can work with color in Photoshop, well, let's dive in. Here in Photoshop, you can see I have 2 images open. We'll start with the image on the left just to kind of keep things simple and introduce some of these concepts. So here I'll press F to go to full screen mode. I also want to highlight that if you want to follow along with me and work on the images while I work on them, go to the description below and click on that link and you can download the high-res files. Okay, with this one, this is a scene that I came upon in Italy. I was photographing a friend's wedding there, and there's this giant sculpture, this big red O. And I met this guy who was riding a motorcycle and asked him to pull up just to kind of catch this shot. And let's say we want to change the color of this sculpture. How the heck are we going to do that? Well, we have a few different options. One option is to use an adjustment like hue saturation. Now you can find that in your adjustments panel. If that panel isn't visible, go to Window and then click on Adjustments. Once you access the panel, you'll see if you hover over the name of the icon, you can find it there. We'll click on hue saturation and that will open this up. With a lot of these panels, what you can do if they're too small, you can extend them if you want to look at them a little bit larger so you can see all the controls here. Now, one of the things that we can do with hue saturation, which you probably already know, is that you can drag the hue slider and it will just make all of the colors in the image change. And let's say that we want to make the O there maybe blue and more saturated and a little bit darker. So we apply that adjustment, but of course, if we zoom in, the poor motorcycle guy in the background of the sky just look horrible, right? So how the heck are we going to limit that or fix that? Now, in Photoshop, there are always 6 or 7 ways to do the same exact thing. So this isn't the only way that we can do this. But one technique is if you have a really defined shape like we do here, we can make a selection of that. So I'm going to use a selection tool, which is located over here in the Tools panel called Object Select. So we'll choose that tool and then just drag over the object that we want to select, let go. Photoshop will do some magic. It'll try to figure out what the main object is. It's just looking for contrast and edges and continuity and stuff like that. It selects this. Now when I go and click on my adjustment layer icon, you can see that adjustment layer has a mask, which is black and white. And if you Option or Alt click on the mask, you can see that here. The white area is the area that was selected. The black area is the area that wasn't selected. And in masking, white reveals and black conceals. So what that means to me, here I'll Option click on a Mac, Alt click on Windows to go back to the regular view. What that means is if we go to the tab for the adjustment, now when I drag the slider around, we can see that it's only affecting that part of the image, and I can change the brightness of that area, the lightness slider, I can change the color saturation, and of course change this to a different color. And then if we want to see if we like it, we can just click on the eye icon, there's our before, click again, there's the after. Okay, well, that's one way that we can make color adjustments. Now, keep in mind, I'm trying to start kind of simple and things are going to get more complex. I just need to introduce a few foundational principles. So that's sort of technique number 1, at least on an introductory level. Let's turn the visibility of that layer off. And next, let's look at another kind of adjustment layer. And also, let's talk about how we can duplicate a mask. This is an awesome technique that you'll use all the time in Photoshop. So for this one, I'm going to go ahead and just turn the visibility of that layer off for a moment. I'll go up to my adjustment panel and I'm going to choose color balance. Now color balance has some pretty intuitive controls. We can work on different tonal regions, shadows, midtones, highlights. We'll just leave it in the midtones for now. And we're just going to make kind of a crazy, wacky adjustment and just looking at the way that everything looks and say, okay, I like the color of this sculpture here, but I don't like everything else, obviously. It looks horrible. So what are we going to do? Well, we could use the object selection tool, or if you already have a good mask like we have here, over here in the layers panel, you can hold down the Option key on a Mac, Alt on Windows, and then Option click and drag on Mac, Alt click and drag on Windows, and that allows you to copy and paste the mask from one layer to another. So if ever you've put an effort in making a mask, a simple or complex mask, you can always copy that. You'll see this later. It will help us out when we work with the VW bus photograph. But now I have this, so this particular adjustment, as we can see, is all about just affecting that specific area, and I can fine tune however I want this to look. If I want it to have a specific tone or look, or just bring out the reds or whatever it is. Okay, so that was technique number 2. Let's take a look at technique number 3, but this time, let's speed up the workflow even more. And what I mean by that is this. Let me just turn off the visibility of this layer for a moment. We're going to use an adjustment which is called solid color. Now you can find solid color down here if you click on the adjustment layer icon at the base of the layers panel. It's located right there. If I click on solid color, one of the things we'll notice is that it opens up our color picker and we can choose a color, click OK, and that comes, like all adjustment layers, with a pre-built mask, which is white, revealing this adjustment everywhere. Except that isn't what I want. I want this only to be on the sculpture area. Yet, before we get to that, let me also talk about when you're using solid color for changing color, very, very rarely do you have this on normal blending mode. Typically, you change this to something like color blending mode. That allows you to see through the color and to blend into all the texture or whatever the image is in the background. So now it's just like everything's tinted blue, right? But still, I don't want everything tinted blue. I just want a certain area. How do we do that? Well, in this case, I want to introduce another technique, which is about activating a mask as a selection. So I have these 2 masks here. They're great masks. I want to reuse one of them. So I hold down the Command key on a Mac, Control key on Windows, and I click on that mask. When I do that, let me zoom in here so you can see this. Can you see how it activates that mask as a selection? We can see the marching ants there. Well, whenever you have an active selection and then you click on an adjustment or one of these adjustment layers like solid color, what that will then do is it will make sure that that's only showing up in that selected area. Now it's showing up, but it looks kind of fake and painted on. If that's the effect you want, great. But if you want it to blend in, you know what blending mode you use, right? Of course, you could try multiply. That can be kind of cool. Screen, that'll be a brightening effect. Soft light, kind of contrast. But typically, if you're working on color, you want to go to that color blending. Now, with this color blending, the cool thing about this particular adjustment is this one's kind of helpful for people who don't really know a lot about maybe color theory or color science, but they just like to double click the little swatch there and just say, well, hey, let me just kind of tinker around and click and try different colors. And I'm just sort of dragging this around and seeing whatever colors I like. And eventually maybe I settle on one that I think looks kind of good. Maybe it's green. That's too saturated. Saturated and bright's up here, more muted. Tones are over here. You can see less saturation. You could find just the right spot for however you want this to appear. And again, you can experiment with that. Now, out of these techniques, which one is the best? Well, that's really an irrelevant question because with Photoshop, it's about learning a lot of different tools because in some situations, some tools will be the perfect solution. They'll save the day, and other times you need to try something else. So we want to really have skills and learn how to do this in different ways. Now, I'm only covering 3 methods. There probably are like 25, but these are good ones to get you started. Okay, let's jump over to the next image. And this is a photograph of my buddy's VW bus, and he was kind enough to loan this to me for the day. So I drove it down to the beach just a mile away from my house, Butterfly Beach, and snapped a photo of it parked there with the palm trees. And what I want to do is zoom in on this because let's just say my friend said, hey, you know what? I'm thinking of changing the color of my bus, but I don't know what color to change it to. And I say, well, hey, you know what? I could mock something up in Photoshop and just kind of give you some different ideas, and maybe we could change the color so that we could have it look orange or blue or red or something else. So let's maybe start off with looking at how we can make some of these changes. So we talked about hue saturation. So let's begin with hue saturation. So here with hue saturation, I'm going to click on that hue saturation adjustment layer icon, and I'm going to drag the slider around. As I drag this slider around, I can see that, yes, I am indeed changing the color throughout the entire image. And maybe we're going to come to a point where we say, okay, That might be a cool color for the bus, but of course, let me zoom out so you can see that. Everything else looks horrible, right? It's not working. How do we limit this to a specific area? Now we've seen how we can make a selection with like the object select tool, and we'll be doing that a little bit later. But another way that we can do this is we can go up here to our mask icon. And on our mask icon, underneath this tab, there's something which is called color range. Now, if you click on color range, it opens up a little dialog. And in this dialog, you have an eyedropper, and you can sample something. Like I'm going to sample the sky. And notice it gives me a mask showing me an area that's white, saying this is the area which will receive this adjustment. Well, I don't want the sky. I obviously want the car. So I'm going to click on the color of the car. Now, in doing that, let me zoom in on the car a little bit more so you can see this. It did a decent job at selecting that, except there are a lot of areas that it didn't cover, kind of like a cheap paint job or something, right? So what we can do is change the fuzziness value here. So as I increase that, you're going to see it's kind of reaching into more color, except now as I increase it so much, it's also reaching into the sky, and it's just not looking very good in those areas. So what do we do? How do we solve this? Well, there's something which is called localized color clusters. And what that means is if I click in an area, and if I have a small range like this, where I click, it's going to extend out just to that far. So I'm going to go ahead and click on the door. You can see it's extending out there. But if I increase the range, watch as it extends out to larger and larger areas. So one of the ways we can do this is control the range. We can also control the fuzziness, which is going to kind of find other similar areas. And with those two controls, they can give us a decent start, but still, I need more areas selected. I need all of this part of the van selected. So I'll go to the eyedropper with the plus icon, and I'll say, hey, also affect this area and this area. While I'm at it, I'm just going to click and hold down, and I'm going to paint across the van. And as we'll start to see, as I paint over these areas, that's telling Photoshop, hey, this is important stuff. Looks like I made a little mistake there, so I'm going to press Command-Z on a Mac to undo that. And I'm just going to click over here and paint over in this way. And it looks like my range is a little bit too far, so I'm going to extend that back there a little bit and maybe make the fuzziness come back a little bit. And a lot of times what you're going to have to do is just play with those sliders until you're pretty much getting the areas that you want to have selected. And we'll look at how we can fine-tune this even further because it's sort of spilling over into the sky over there. And let me just go over here though and fix this part first, and then you'll see what we're going to do is something which is called, or at least I call it, double masking, and it's kind of cool. But first I just want to get a good selection of our vehicle here. Now this is not perfect, but we're going to fine-tune it. We're going to learn a little bit about masking and how to make this even better. Okay. That looks pretty good. I will click OK. And what this will do is it will create a mask for us. And this mask allows us to limit where this color is. And you can see for the most part what's happening is it's affecting the van, except we have a couple problem areas. Let me exaggerate the saturation here, maybe so I can make the problem even worse. Okay, that's pretty good. Let me try to make a color that really stands out. Well, I think red was pretty good. Can you see how we have some of this affecting the sky, some of it affecting the top of the vehicle there, the tire, the road behind here? Now, obviously, you wouldn't have your saturation probably up that high, and you're going to kind of fine-tune the way that color looks, so it won't be that noticeable. But by cranking this up, it helps us see the problem. So what do we do? How do we kind of add a mask to an area which already has a mask? Now, this is a fun little tip for you. What you can do, go back to your background layer, use our object selection tool and say, hey, you know what? I want to see if Photoshop can just select, more or less just the painted area of this vehicle. Let's see how it did. It did a pretty good job, mostly selecting those areas. Some few areas it's not doing the best job. Over here, it didn't quite get that. So I'm going to hold down the Shift key and I'm going to say, hey, add this area to the selection here. So now that's added in. I'm going to hold down the Shift key, add that in over there, and couldn't find anything. That's fine. We can fine tune that later. And what I have is a new area that I can limit this to, but how the heck are we going to do that? Well, what you can do is you can click off of this layer and just go ahead and create what's called a layer group. And what this does is if we click on this with a selection, we can then add a mask to it. So I'm going to click on the Add Layer Mask icon. And because that now has this mask inside of it, if I'm going to add anything into that, it will only show up in that selected area. So in this case, if I drag this adjustment into that folder, can you now see how this adjustment is not affecting the background anymore because I have this mask which is limiting where that adjustment is going, and that's kind of saving the day. Now, of course, sometimes what you'll need to do is you'll need to go into this and say, all right, is this perfect? Maybe I need to grab my brush tool and I need to paint with white because it's not allowing the effect, or maybe it's not bringing the effect in here. So I'll go ahead and paint over here with white, and I'm going to bring that in, make sure it's covering up all those areas there. Maybe it's bringing a little bit too much in on the front of the car. So I'm going to use masking techniques and basically I'm painting with my brush, and I'm painting away this color adjustment on the bumper, on the front headlight, maybe a little bit up there, pressing the spacebar key to move around the image. Now, if you aren't very familiar with masking, I'm going to be making a tutorial on that. But for now, hopefully you're starting to see how masking can be a really great key, which can help you to hand paint where the adjustment is coming into play. Now, the cool thing about this double masking is we had our first mask, which was just kind of okay, and then our second mask, which really helped to save the day. And it's these two masks together that helped us to achieve this kind of a look. And the cool thing about this is all of this is non-destructive, so we can always turn this off. And we can also just double click the icon for the adjustment and say, you know what? I don't want something that saturated or that red. I want something, I don't know, maybe a little bit of a different color. Maybe I want to go with blue and I want to go for a blue color. Or maybe I want to try something different with hue saturation. There's a mode called Colorize. And what Colorize allows you to do is to create really beautiful kind of, it's almost like what it's doing is it's laying color on top of it. It's like a color blending mode almost. And what it does is it removes any artifacts. So if you see any weird artifacts in your color and you need to have something that has a little bit more consistency, this might be the ticket right here. And let's say we just are going to go with blue and maybe a nice bright saturated deep blue like that. And we say, cool, okay, so we have color option number one to our friend. Yeah, you could paint this thing kind of a nice blue, and that could be a cool option for you. But of course, they want other options. They say, well, what about, I don't know, orange? We say, okay, no problem. We're going to turn off the eye icon for this layer. And we're going to create an adjustment using color balance, because remember, that's another one of the tools that we're going to cover here. And with color balance, we're just going to kind of intuitively drag these sliders around. And we're going to look if we can't see if we can kind of mix or shift the color so that we can sort of create a new color that might have, I don't know, kind of an orangish look to it, something like that. And currently, because this is inside of this one mask, it's pretty good shape, except you can see it's hitting the bumper over there and over here. So what we need to do with this orange adjustment is we need to bring up the mask from below. Do you remember how to do that? On a Mac, Option click and drag. On Windows, that's Alt click and drag. And that will allow you to bring that up to that area. Now, in doing that, one of the things I'm seeing here too is I'm going to click in the mask on the top and grab my brush, paint with black, is that the door handle is receiving the paint color. That's no bueno. We don't like that. So I'm going to go ahead and paint that off there. And I think otherwise that's pretty good. And let's zoom out just a touch so you can see that, or maybe I'll zoom back in. And I think that's looking pretty good. I'm just going to here with my mask, just making sure this isn't spilling over into any of these other areas here. So it has a nice kind of pure, clean look. So it looks real, right? So it looks like we're kind of really changing the color here. There's our color balance version. Here is our hue saturation one. We tried it with just regular hue saturation. Then we tried it with Colorize on hue saturation. And then I said there's one more that I wanted to try. And this was one which was solid color. So let's do the same thing as before. And you can see why I'm kind of doing it this way. First, we started with the sculpture, and now we're doing the same exact thing here, except we added in something new, double masking. But what I want to do next is I'm going to hold down the Command key on a Mac, Control key on Windows, and click on my mask icon. That will activate that mask. I'll go to the icon, and I'll choose solid color. And with solid color, I'm going to choose a color. And I forget what color was another idea? Well, let's just say, we're going to go with a green or something. We know that that's not going to look very good. It's going to look kind of fake, right? Because it's just like paint. It's like a cheap spray paint job on there. But when we take this to that blending mode of color, all of a sudden we're going to see the magic. And it looks too saturated to me. So remember how to change the saturation level, how you can bring this closer, or kind of a more of a muted green. That kind of looks more of like a, I don't know, hippie VW bus color, I think, than what we had before. And because all of these are living inside of this folder, what we can then do is, let me make it a little more prominent so we can actually see. What we can do is turn the eye icon on and off, and we have all of these various changes. We can even combine them together, right? You can see how these two combine together to create a new color, and it can be really fun in ways that we do that. Okay, so kind of fascinating, right? How we can really quickly change color in a nice, realistic way, and how we can take advantage of masking, how we can use adjustment layers. Another topic I said I wanted to cover was tonality. And let's say that we get to this point, we realize we just kind of want to change the tonality. What I mean by that, kind of the brightness, kind of the feel of the color. Well, another great adjustment layer for doing something like that is curves. So if I'm inside of this little group here, right, everything we're doing is inside of that. So we'll click into one of these layers. If I click on curves, you can see that shows up inside of this group, and I'll put it at the top of the stack. You can just drag this around, just click on the icon and drag. And if I change the way this looks, bringing maybe my dark point down and my bright point up, you can see that basically what I'm doing is in this part of the image, I'm saying, hey, let's add a little bit of a visual snap, or maybe we just need to brighten it up. And I can have this control whatever color it is. I could have it control the green, the original color. You can see how it's adding that, or the blue color, and we can control it in that way. So we just have this layer where we now have another degree of control. Now, if you're familiar with curves, you probably also know that you can fine-tune color in curves, but that's probably for another conversation. But you can do that if you really need to fine-tune color to have it match something specific, if it was a product and you need it to be just a real specific color. So I'm not going to go there, but I did at least want to introduce this idea of adding a brightness layer, because sometimes you'll change the color of something and notice, oh, it's a little too muddy, a little too dark, and so we can just boost that color up. If we want to have the same mask as before, Option click and drag that mask on a Mac, Alt click and drag on Windows to make sure that that's just really hitting the area that we want it to. Okay, well, this is kind of cool, right? So far, so good. We've made these adjustments where we have our VW bus, and I'll zoom out a smidge so we can see this. Maybe I'll zoom out even more so we can enjoy this nice little scene. There is our bus. Here is kind of the blue version of the bus. Here is the orange. Here's a green, and then here's one where we kind of snapped or brightened up the tonality there of that. And maybe we're going to do something along one of those lines or whatever it is. And then our friend says, okay, that was cool. I love seeing my vintage car or my product or whatever it is you need to change, right, with these colors. But this gives me some ideas. I think I want the door to be blue, and I kind of want everything else to be orange. So we scratch our head and say, okay, wait. So let me get this straight. So you're telling me you want your bus to be orange, but you might paint the door a different color. And your friend, being maybe kind of the hippie that he or she is, says, yeah, I think that would be cool. So we say, okay, what we're going to do here is go to the background layer. We're going to use one of our tools. The object select tool won't work because the door isn't a defined enough object, but we can try quick select. This won't work perfectly, but what you can do with this tool is drag over an area, and it will try to find edges. And let me zoom in here so you can see this. It did a good job on the edge, but it picked up the shadow. So hold down the Option key on a Mac, Alt on Windows, and I'm subtracting from the selection. And this works with all selection tools. Shift adds, Option subtracts. So, and that's Option on a Mac, Alt on Windows. And so what I'm doing is I'm subtracting these little areas from the selection, these areas where it just kind of was a little bit overambitious. And I'll just keep subtracting those, and then maybe add this back in here, subtract this area down here. In Photoshop, there's a mantra. I don't know if you're familiar with it, but one of the things that is often said, at least in Photoshop instruction, not like Photoshop talks or has mantras. That would be cool if it did. maybe one day, right? But what Photoshop teachers like to say, like myself, is select before you correct. And so what we're doing is we're putting a little bit of effort here to get a decent selection, because if we can make this good, then it will help our correction that much more. Okay, so I'm just gonna say that's good enough for what I'm trying to do. So I make a selection of the door, and then I think to myself, okay, Chris, how do I want to change this? I think one of the easiest ways, at least for me, is hue saturation. So I'm gonna make sure I'm inside of my little group there. Click in one of these layers. I'll click on the adjustment layer icon for hue saturation. That will create a hue saturation adjustment with a mask based on my selection. And then I can just start playing. Now, of course, I can swing the color. We've seen how we can do that. We can also choose to colorize. Colorize, not always, but sometimes gives really nice blending and can allow you to find just great way to kind of have a nice, beautiful color here, maybe something like that. And then I need to fix up my mask. So with my mask, I'll grab my brush tool, I'll paint with black, and I'm just gonna paint away how this color came over into the lights on the door here. So I'm painting with black. Remember, black conceals. In other words, it says, hey, if there's a blue tint to this or whatever, do not hit this part of the image. So I'm just protecting that from that area. And I'm gonna go over here on this side, make sure the door handle doesn't have any of that either. And then tap the X key. What the X key is, it flips between black and white. So if you need to add anything in, you can just do that. All right, so let's zoom out a little bit. Let's see how our little VW bus, I guess I'm laughing because it's kind of funny, right? To see how we have this color. And we show that to the client or friend or ourselves. We're just doing something creative to learn about color. And we say, okay, cool, that's kind of fun. But now that makes me think, you know, gosh, I'm kind of digging how this looks. I wish this back sort of quarter panel was green. Let's do that same thing again. Okay, so you go to the background layer, because that's where you can make a good selection. Choose a tool like Quick Select. With Quick Select, you're just going to drag over that area and then keep dragging to add to it. If it brings in too much, hold down the Option key on a Mac, Alt on Windows. And what will happen is Photoshop actually will get smarter. So the more you use this tool on an image, the more it will kind of figure out, oh, these are the kind of pixels that this person's searching for. So I'm just going to make those selection. I'm going to hold down the Option key here to make sure I'm not selecting the rear tail light, learning from my mistake last time. And Photoshop learns, we learn, right? And again, it's not going to be perfect, but I think it's a good start. And this time, let's just do the same thing again. We'll go to the top of the layer stack inside of this group. Here I am. I'll click on my adjustment layer icon for hue saturation. Again, it doesn't really matter which method you use. This time, I'm going to shift the hue. And basically, what this is doing is it's remapping the color. And you can kind of see this down here in these bars if you exaggerate this for a moment. Let me bring this back to the default setting because this may be helpful for you. The top is the current color. So here's orange. The color spectrum below is what we're shifting that orange to. So you can see how orange went to yellow, green, and then watch as I keep shifting that. Now the orange, which was right here, is going to that blue color. And I forget what color I had said we were going to. I think we were going to a green. So I can remap that color, and then I can also change its brightness or its darkness or different things like that. Now, it would be really odd to use hue saturation extended that far. In this case, because this image isn't a super, super high-res capture, it's a little bit pixelated. So I'm going to go to Colorize. And whenever I notice, I guess, like pixel problems, I find Colorize helps me get even better results. Then if I zoom in and get kind of nitpicky, I can see there are a few areas where I still see orange peeking through. So I'm on the mask, grab my brush, and here I will paint with white, and I'm just going to paint over those areas. Because there's a shadow in the background, I don't have to paint very carefully because it's not going to pick up the color very well. I'll tap the X key, which allows me to paint with black if you have black as one of your colors. And so you can just paint with black or white here, and that allows me to have this color. All right, so there you have it. We now have this bus, which is kind of multicolored and different. And our friend says, you know what? Now that I see this, I really wish the bus, rather than it being having a blue door, I really wish that the door color was different. And all that we have to do is go in there and say, well, what color do you want it? And he says, well, I kind of want it red and really saturated red. We say, great. And then he says, could you just show me other options? And we could click on hue saturation. We could show him lots of options. We could kind of have fun with that, right? We could say, well, here's an option. We're just remapping all the colors. And we kind of have this dancing color palette here. And he says, oh my gosh, one of those might be really interesting or whatever. And the whole point is just looking at how we can use these tools in some corrective ways. Sometimes you need to correct color, and also just creative ways, and kind of playing and having fun with color. So what I really recommend you do is click on that link below to download these source files and try some of this for yourself. And if this is kind of confusing, just pause the video, test it out, rewind, try it again, and basically just try to work with changing color with these 3 adjustments layers that we've worked on, which was hue saturation, color balance, and then solid color. And remember, the trick with solid color, when you want to use that, it's to make sure you're changing that layer blending mode to color. And it's not that one way is right or wrong or better or worse. Really, it's a little bit about how your mind works and how you want to work in Photoshop. And that's what makes Photoshop so much fun. Well, I hope that you enjoyed this little tutorial on working with color. If you liked it, be sure to let me know. If you have other ideas for tutorials that you would like me to create, add those in the comments below. If you're like, Chris, I need a really good tutorial on masking, or I need a really good tutorial on improving selections, or whatever it is, let me know, and I would be glad to create something for you. And most of all, I hope that you have a fantastic rest of your day. Thanks again for joining me in this little tutorial. Adios, you guys. Yoo-hoo.